This episode is a more detailed follow-up to my 2017 video, Who Controls All of Our Money? I'm going to focus on the United States in this video only because they're the world reserve currency. But everything in this video affects all of us because the central banks around the world are all doing the same thing. With that being said, let's begin. Around the world today, we see central banks printing money. So here's a question. We're told from a young age that money is hard to come by. We should study to work our whole life to earn it. How then can all this money suddenly come from nowhere? How is money created? Who's going to pay it back? What exactly does all of this mean? And what's going to happen next? In this episode, we'll explore the 3 ways that money is being created and some of the consequences that are going to happen. I'm also going to show you the true origins of wealth inequality. If you watch this episode the whole way through, you should have a well-rounded idea of what's going on today. It's important for people to know. I'm really just trying to help with that. This journey starts off simple enough, but by the end, you'll start to see the insanity of what we're dealing with.
You are watching Cold Fusion TV.
The first form of money is the one created by government. In practice, it's outsourced to the central bank Royal Mint, but controlled by the government. Physical money comes in 2 forms, either paper money or coins. This physical money is a tiny fraction of the economy, and in many economies, this kind of money only makes up about 3 to 8%. This physical money is created in order to meet the obligations of private banks. When you go to an ATM and try to withdraw cash, banks need to make sure that they have enough cash in order to meet those obligations. So let's take a $10 note for example. It costs approximately 3 cents in order to print this note. This means that there's approximately $9.97 of profit for creating a $10 note. This $9.97 can now be added to tax revenue of the government. This revenue is called seigniorage. So since the government makes profit from printing and minting coins and can reduce the amount of taxation on the public, you might be thinking, why don't governments just always print physical money? The main reason that governments don't create the majority of money is because of politicians. If the politician running the office could create money at will, there would be a massive conflict of interest. There would be an urge to keep printing to fulfill campaign promises or fund wars. This would, in theory, destroy the currency by excessive printing, causing massive devaluation. The more money you have in circulation, the less it's worth. And that's a key point. For example, if massive inflation takes place and the average Joe has $1 million, but that $1 million only buys an apple, how much is $1 million actually worth? The loss in purchasing power of money over time is called inflation, and when inflation gets out of hand, money becomes worthless. Some recent examples of runaway inflation include Argentina, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. In this animation, you can graphically see just how fast inflation can run away. You don't see it coming, and as the inflation rate goes up, people quickly lose faith in the currency. For example, here we can see some people in Venezuela using money to make handbags and to draw pictures on because it simply isn't worth anything anymore. You can think of money as a measuring stick of value, a measuring stick that is highly elastic and can change depending on how much of it there is. For thousands of years, gold was the measuring stick of value. Gold was kind of like a physical anchor, keeping the money supply in check and governments responsible. In 1971, President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold at a fixed value. Since that point, money, the measuring stick of value, has become elastic. Since the US dollar backs all other currencies as a reserve currency, Nixon's decision changed the world. In all of this, you might still notice that despite politicians supposedly not being able to influence money creation, it's happening anyway. This may cause problems, as we'll see later in the episode. So to recap, the government creates physical forms of money, like notes and coins. Only about 3 to 8% of money is made this way. Seigniorage is the income from that physical money. This income is both a benefit to the government and the taxpayer. It reduces debt for the government and reduces the burden on the individual taxpayer. The reason governments don't create more of this money is because of the inflation risk from politicians' decisions. Let's move on to number 2, private banks and debt-based money. The vast amount of money created today is done by the private banking sector. In most developed economies, about 97% of the entire money supply is created digitally by banks, and therefore most money in the world is privatized. Banks invented digital money when they managed to persuade lawmakers after many early bank runs. A bank run is an event where depositors try to get their money out all at once, but the banks don't have it. From these events, banks argued that they should be legally allowed to create more deposits than actually exist based upon debt, and this is how governments outsourced the creation of digital money. The idea of using debt as money begins much earlier than this. English innovators set the stage for banks to become the creators of money across the globe. In 1704, the English Parliament passed the Promissory Notes Act. Take a good look at your screen. What you are seeing is a promissory note. In this case, it's a written promise to say that you'll pay back the $20 you borrowed. Under the law, this piece of paper was as good as $20. Today, we digitize this agreement and call it debt. If it helps, whenever I say debt in this episode, you can think of this piece of paper, remembering that it's as good as money. Okay, so banks were authorized to be able to use these debt notes to circulate as money. From this point, banks were free to create and destroy debt and hence money from themselves rented out at interest. In the modern world, as you'll see, the whole world's economy is based upon these promises. Let's take a look at how it works today. When you go to a bank to borrow some money, the banking license gives that bank the ability to create money every time they issue a loan. They do this through the double accounting system. For example, if you buy a $500,000 house, the bank creates $500,000 in their account and you have $500,000 in debt. That is, the promise to pay it back with interest. This $500,000 debt can enter the wider economic system because when you purchase the house, the owner of that house can use that fresh debt that was created by the bank that they received from you to buy other things in the economy. This means in our current system, if we want to have more growth, we need more debt. The key point here is that debt is actually money, just from a different point of view. To the lender, it's an asset of money, and to the borrower, it's a liability of debt. But they are one and the same. It sounds a bit complicated, but all you need to know is that when a bank issues a loan, it's not somebody else's savings. It's not money that the bank had. It's essentially brand new money that they create. They simply type it into a computer and it appears as a digital representation of the government's money which you can spend. The beneficiary of this brand new money is actually the bank because they get to charge interest on that money, and that's how they make a profit. Later, when you repay this loan, the debt disappears and the money also disappears, but the bank's profit from the interest remains. The real estate and property markets are the largest tools for creating digital money. This is because banks have decided that it's the safest yet most profitable form of creating debt. Because if you can't repay the loan, the banks can simply take your house. In developed nations, vast amounts of money is backed by the mortgage market. In Australia, where I live, it's become particularly bad. For decades now, the banks have abandoned investment into the wider economy and have shifted their focus to investments in housing. This has pushed up the housing prices as people take on more debts to buy houses that they otherwise couldn't afford, but the banks make more money. This cycle over many decades has caused one of the biggest property bubbles on the planet.
We're addicted to debt.
Yes, we're addicted to debt as individuals, as households. The ratios are way higher than almost every other country.
So that's loans. But what about deposits?